Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today, we will be discussing lean and the 8 forms of waste. We at Kent State Center for Corporate and Professional Development would like to thank all of you for attending today's webinar on this beautiful Ohio spring day and hope that you and your family are staying safe during this time of crisis. We'll be doing something different today since we want to continue to deliver these informational webinars for you and practice social distancing. We are delivering this webinar remotely. Your facilitator, Tom Putnam, will be presenting from his house, and I will be from mine. My name is Patrick Allen. I'm the program manager for Kent State's Center for Corporate and Professional Development's Open Enrollment Program. Our center specializes in providing employee development for partnering organizations in Northeast Ohio and around the country. We offer training as public open enrollment programs delivered in Independence and also on-site customized programs delivered at your location. I'm joined today by Kent State facilitator Tom Putnam. I will be serving as your host, and Tom will be our presenter for today. Tom has more than 30 years of professional experience. His work assignments have been in many diverse areas, including tooling design, process engineering, quality systems and planning, supplier quality and continuous improvement, all which incorporate lean manufacturing and Six Sigma methodologies. Tom served as thought leader and training leader and Six Sigma Master Black Belt at the Timken Company and the Timken Steel Corporation. He has trained over 500 people in Lean Six Sigma methodologies, including yellow, green, and black belt levels, while successfully leading and mentoring over 75 projects. In addition, he has significant experience in customer warranty and claims investigations. He has also taught other topics such as 5 why analysis and problem-solving techniques. Tom holds an associate's degree in mechanical technology and a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. He is also a certified Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt. Everyone in attendance today has been muted to avoid background noise from any of the nearly 200 registered participants. We do encourage you to ask questions at any point during the hour. You can submit your questions in writing using the control panel on the right side of your screen. I will present your questions to the presenter as time permits throughout the webinar. There is a handout available to you that summarizes today's presentation. It is located under the Handouts tab on the control panel. We encourage you to download this handout and take notes during today's presentation. We are recording today's webinar, and you will receive an email with a link to the recording after we conclude our time together. Before we begin, I would like to ask a question of you, the audience. How familiar are you with the lean tools and concepts? I will give you some time to answer this question and then show Tom the results. Okay, now that we have the results, it looks like the biggest percentage is 47% with a little experience, followed by not very much experience, that's why I'm here, and enough to be dangerous at 21%. So now that we have the results, I will turn it over to Tom Putnam.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Patrick. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Hopefully you can. We're on the slide as Patrick introduced the topic for me. Thanks, Patrick, and giving some background there on leans in the 8 forms of waste. And welcome everyone to the webinar. Nice to see that we have kind of a variety of experience levels and knowledge base for this. But regardless of what your skill level is, what I'd like to start with is kind of review what we're going to talk about this morning. And the intent of this is to give everybody kind of a common background to make sure that, you know, the terminology that you're seeing here and I'm using, you know, will be somewhat familiar with you, at least after this presentation. Lean's been around for a while. It's been very popular, and it's proved to be very powerful for many organizations, both from manufacturing of product as well as service organizations. And hopefully we can explain some of that throughout this course of this webinar. So we are going to talk about the 8 forms of waste. Before we do that, I want to just provide some basic definitions of lean, along with an introduction to the principles and what people call the ideal state or the true north condition. And what those things then allow us to talk about is this idea of what is of value to the customer, and what are the things that are wasteful. And with that in mind, then we'll talk about the specific 8 forms of waste that hopefully after we're done with this, we can learn to go to our workplace and identify those. And with those in mind, in the concepts from the 4 lean rules, which are used to deploy a lean production system, we can leverage the tools that would serve as countermeasures to eliminate those forms of waste. And we're going to do that through a scientific method, you know, a project-oriented method, a continuous improvement method. And the lean people like to call that A3 thinking, and we'll explain what that means as well. But, you know, basically that is kind of the crux of doing small changes for the better. And the Japanese use the word Kaizen for that. And you probably have heard that word before in your discussions with lean tools in the past. With that in mind, definitions here first. I think when people hear the word lean, you know, they want to think about the idea that lean means fit, active, maybe agile is a word that comes to mind. And I think that's the kind of the reference for using the word lean when we talk about these concepts. I've got 2 definitions here on the screen. I think both of them are useful, and I think they're consistent with each other. The first one, you see a lot of underlining, but basically it's this idea, it's a systematic approach, meaning that we've got processes, and those processes are part of a system, and those systems are, parts of the system are interdependent upon each other. And we need to recognize that if we want to make improvement. Lean is about eliminating waste, also known as non-value-added activities. And you do that through making changes. You're making improvements. And you're always focusing on making sure that your product or your service flows to the customer when the customer wants it. And you're always striving to get better. You're seeking that perfection. The second term, you'll see a lot of the same terminology in it. We see systematic method, elimination of waste. The Japanese word for that is muda, that's why it's in quotes. You'll see 2 other terms here, though, that I think are absolutely part of what lean is about, and they certainly relate to the 8 forms of waste as well. But it's this idea of reducing the overburden or strain on an organization. The Japanese word for that is muri. And again, the idea there is either strain in terms of financial strain or strain on the employees themselves, the associates that are doing the work. And again, the idea with lean is not to make people's work harder or to stress them more. The idea with lean is to create a work environment and systems in place that basically remove a lot of those barriers and allow people to, you know, do their work with less stress and less burden. The last term that's used in this second definition talks about unevenness, or mura. And that's an interesting concept too, because when you think about unevenness, we're really, the other word that comes to mind is variation. So lean focuses on reducing the variation. And why do we want to reduce variation? Well, there's one of those simple quotes: variation is the enemy of quality. Variation creates uncertainty. Variation causes us to make adjustments. And if we have to make adjustments, we're spending time doing that. So all of these things kind of lead back to this idea: how can we get better? How can we get faster? How can we be more responsive to the customer? And these 8 forms of waste, once we start to be able to see them and recognize them and put them into context, we can start to apply countermeasures to attack and eliminate them. So again, Lean said that's what we want to do. We want to eliminate waste. We want to eliminate overburden. We want to eliminate variation or unevenness. Throughout all of that, our focus is on the customer. And Lean strives to provide the right part or service at the right time in the right quantity when the customer needs it to use it. We're striving, as we said, to eliminate waste, overburden, and variation. And in order to do that, Lean focuses a lot on making problems visible. Because if you don't recognize you have a problem, you're not going to address it. And when we do have problems, we want to apply good methods so that we really get to the root of those problems and understands what's causing them, so that we can address countermeasures to fix that. And all this, one of the mantras for Lean is this idea that people are the cornerstone. The people in your organization know the organization. They know the processes they're involved in. They come to work trying to do a good job, wanting to contribute and feel good about their work. And the purpose of management and the business as a whole is to engage those people, empower those people, and leverage their skill set. So we want to recognize people's value, engage them in the work. And that's one of the things that I think I've seen at times in organizations when they first start to try and do something like this or other continuous improvement methods. If they make an error, it might be that they don't engage the people in that. And some people feel like continuous improvement or changes are being done to them rather than with them, and allowing them to participate in it. So that would be a reference point there. Make sure that people are engaged. That certainly builds commitment. So these things that are on this screen are really part of what we talk about. You'll hear people say the ideal state, the ideal condition, this true north condition. And if we take that first bullet point there, the right part or service, the right time, the right quantity, with these other facets as well, we can maybe rephrase this into different words. Really what we're trying to say is, let's make as small a unit or provide as small a unit of service as possible to be very focused on that customer when the customer requires it. So that's that: provide one piece or service at a time, immediately, when the customer asks for it. Ideally, we'd say, well, can we do that at no cost to us? Zero cost. Can we do that in a safe work environment with no strain or stress on the organization? Obviously, you look at that and you shake your head and say, well, I can't do that. That's not possible. It isn't fully achievable. But the intent of this is to say, that's the ideal state. That's this perfect condition, this true north condition. So that's always out there for us. Lexus, as an automotive company, they even have their slogan that says the relentless pursuit of perfection. And they're referencing, I think, to what's here on this slide. What we're trying to do is to get as close to this as possible. So with that in mind, we always have an opportunity to get better. We're never done, and I don't see that as a bad thing. We have an opportunity to continuously improve. So on this slide, we talk a lot about the customer. We're focused on providing something to a customer. And obviously, that's why people are in business. We're here to provide a service or a product to a customer that meets their needs. And the customer, by definition, then, is really that person that's defining what they value from us, from our product or service. The customer tells us what they value because they indicate that with how much they're willing to pay for our product or service. Anything that the customer doesn't want, which isn't of value to them, we would recognize it's non-value added. If the customer doesn't pay us for, we would identify as non-value added, or also we can introduce this term now, waste. Some people in an organization might say, well, I don't deal with the outside customer. What I do doesn't directly provide to the outside customer. And that may be true. If that's the case, what you'd want to think about is identify who your downstream operation is, who are you providing your service or product to, and what is it that they require from you. So these non-value added activities, the thing that the customer isn't interested in paying us for, they may not necessarily care if we do them, but whether we do them or not is immaterial to the customer. Things like inspection can actually fall into that category. Unless the customer is explicitly paying you for inspection, in theory, that's not a value-added activity for the customer. It may be necessary for your business to ensure that you're delivering to the requirements the customer wants, but it's not necessarily something that the customer values. Obviously, if you're buying something, you expect it to meet your need. You're buying it for a purpose. So it should work as you expect it to when you purchase it. How many times you inspect it, or where you store that, or how long it's stored, those things are not really of interest to the customer. So these non-value added activities around waste and stress or strain on an organization, overburden on equipment or the organization itself or the associates in the organization, and the variation in the outputs, the variations that we have to adjust for. All of those things basically create inefficiencies. They create waste, and those things end up translating into time and money that reduces an organization's profitability and competitiveness. Patrick mentioned in the startup here, we're really talking about lean, and I really think that lean, as we're introducing these concepts and the definition of the true north state, it's really helpful. Lean provides a really nice footprint for us to focus on and understand what deliverables and goals we want to accomplish. Six Sigma fits in really well with this. Six Sigma originated under the concepts of actually reducing waste, but the main focus of Six Sigma was this idea of this variation. And that's where these methodologies support each other very well. Understanding variation and attacking that at its source. and root causes for that variation. So how do we go about, now that we know that these are bad things, we know what the good things are, we're focused on that, serving the customer immediately in the smallest quantities possible. What do we do to try and get closer to that point? One approach that Lean likes to use is to just say, well, where are we today? What's our current condition? What's our current state? Let's go and see that. Let's learn to observe. People are a visual species. We take in a lot of information with our eyes, and going and seeing it, taking that information and documenting the current condition with all of the good things and the bad things in it helps us to understand where opportunities are. Some of you might have used the term gap analysis before. Well, you can start to identify gaps because you have the ideal state condition. You have the true north definition. Again, you're never going to exactly get there, but you're going to get closer to it. And understanding where you are currently and understand what that perfect state is, you can start to develop a plan that says, let's start to think about what we can do to get closer to the ideal state. Let's create a future state, an action plan. Let's look at the way product flows or services flow to the customer and create a strategy that deploys the concepts of Lean, because we know they're good best practice stuff and they'll work. And let's take those actions. And that's really this idea of, call it what you want. You could use the term projects. You could use the term Kaizen events. They're structured, focused, action-oriented practices to get you from your current condition to a better place. And that's continuous improvement. My experience with doing this type of work is I would suggest that you try not to do too much at once. You kind of start small. We have that term, you eat the elephant one bite at a time, walk before you run. All those things I think are fair for this. In any state, what you need to understand or define for yourself is, what is this process that I'm focused on? What is this value stream that I'm interested in? And you may have multiple value streams. You may provide different services to your customer. You may provide different products to customers. Depending on how your assets are deployed, how your people do the work, you may need to specifically separate out and focus on one of those value streams as you do this work. And identify what is the customer value in that product or service. What is the demand for that product or service? How much is required of me, of our organization, to deliver that? What are the steps in that process? That's all part of doing that analysis. So once we've identified this, we could use the term product family or value stream group that we're interested in, that we want to deploy Lean practices for. And we're going to go and see that current condition and capture information around it, recognize its shortfalls and its potential. When we go see that, if we have eyes for waste, we can start to identify the opportunities that are there. And that's really the crux of this presentation now, is to talk about what has been defined as the 8 forms of waste. And I'm providing a mnemonic there for you. There are other mnemonics that could be used for this, but this This one that I like to use, I think it's easy. It's Tim T. Wood. And basically the letters in his name, Tim T. Wood, represent the first letter of each of the 8 forms of waste categories here. I'll just go through those. Transportation, the first T. It's really talking about movement of material or movement of service information. In some level of transportation, as with any of these aspects that we see here on the slide, they may be necessary for an organization based on the current condition. But if you go back to the true north or ideal state condition, in an ideal world, if we didn't have to move product or we didn't have to shuffle data around, if it was all right in hand and would go direct to the customer, we would have less burden. We would be more efficient. Again, the customer is not paying you for moving product around in your facility or moving data from one form to another form. It's really not a value to the customer. The end result's is what of value to the customer. So transportation is the first one. The second one is one that you can see a lot of times, and known as inventory. And this is an interesting one because you'll see the definition there. Any supply in excess of process requirements necessary to produce good product or service. Yeah, how much inventory is necessary? Well, again, Lean would say, ideally, let's make one piece at a time or provide us one service at a time for the customer. And we're not going to make a batch. So the minimum amount would be the one piece or service that we're processing to give to the customer. We don't need anything more than that. Anything more than that, we want to challenge ourselves to say, can we reduce it? Batch processes make that challenging. So what I mean by a batch process, in a manufacturing world, you know, again, Patrick said I worked in Timken Steel, so we can think of creating a batch of steel, a heat of steel as they call it. You could say that same thing if you're in a bakery and you're going to make a batch of cookies. You know, how many cookies are you interested in making at one time? How many pounds of steel do you need to make at one time? And that is going to dictate this idea of the batch size or the inventory that you're going to create. So those are concepts, again, in the 8 forms of waste we want to challenge ourselves, recognizing that, you know, the smallest unit we can produce, 1 would be the ideal state, and anything more than that gives us an opportunity to reduce it. Motion is this idea of movement. Most of the time it's associated with people, you know, physical movement that somebody's doing. It can also be a machine. And the idea here is if that motion is in excess of what allows you to create value for the customer, then why do you have it? And in that aspect too, when you have excess motion, particularly with people or with machines, you're creating strain or unnecessary strain or overburden. Wear and tear, you might think of it that way. So, you know, motion gets us into talking about making work easier for people to do, ergonomic design, those types of things come into play there. Talent. You know, this gets back to the third aspect of the Lean principles. People. You know, people are the cornerstone. People have the knowledge. People can apply new skills. They can change the process. And there used to be 7 forms of waste because lean thinkers actually thought that the talent in engaging people was so fundamental that it wasn't even explicitly referenced. But over time, it became clear that it's important to explicitly state that, and that's why we have Tim has a middle initial T for talent. The last name here, wood, stands for waiting, idle time, things that are not adding value. Somebody is waiting either on direction to do work or physically waiting on product to do their value-added activities to, or physically waiting on information to provide a service. Those are all things that obviously, if we want to be efficient, we wouldn't want people waiting. In traditional manufacturing, people have attacked waiting by providing additional, if you want to say, work. And it looks good, but the issue is it basically creates this hidden factory or hides waste. So if I'm waiting, for example, on something to come to me that I'm supposed to be working on for a customer demand, and I can't work on that because it's not here for me, and I go and I start working on a different assignment, I'm busy doing that assignment, and that may be of value, but it's maybe not of value in at the current time. And that gets us to this next form of waste, overproduction. And that's really this idea of producing something either in an excess amount or producing it before the customer needs it. In overproduction, we can think of that in service organizations too. If you've got a line of customers waiting for service and you're only addressing perhaps one particular type of service for a customer, then the other customers for the alternate service are obviously going to wait. So you're overproducing because you're doing some of the work faster for certain customers and not fast enough for others. Overprocessing. Overprocessing is different than overproduction. Overprocessing is effort that you do to a product or a service that's more than is required. And the customer doesn't value it, the customer doesn't see it. A simple example of that would be a, perhaps a part that needs a certain heat treat time, and perhaps that's 2 hours, or a cookie in the oven that needs to be baked for 10 minutes and you leave it in for 11 minutes. That extra minute may not have hurt the product, but also wasn't necessary to meet what the customer wants. The last of the forms of waste, defects, that's rework or scrap, anything that isn't right the first time. Yeah, a lot of times that's fairly easy to see. The rework issue, though, is one that a lot of times people that aren't lean thinkers don't recognize that that's an opportunity. They take it as part of the normal routine that says, well, it's still okay because I can make it right. In the lean mantra, what we'd like to do is make it so that we don't have to look at it twice. We know that's correct. So those are the 8 forms of waste. Tim T. Wood. Again, some of these things in our current condition might be necessary, but what lean wants us to do is to challenge ourselves to get closer to this ideal state, to drive those problems away so that we have a a future state where those issues can't occur at all. So how do we attack these? We know now what our true north condition is, what our overall goals are. We know what these forms of waste are. We can start to recognize them. What we want to do is try to develop a lean work environment that can start to help us to attack those forms of waste. And that lean work environment is really these 4 lean rules. You can think of them as attributes. You'll find books that reference this as the Toyota production system. And they really constitute these things: flow, connection, standard work, and then improvement with a help chain at the source. When we talk about flow, what we mean is the product or service needs to flow to the customer. Rather than being pushed to the customer, we want the customer to let us know what they want, and to pull that from us. That flow needs to be, explicitly defined. Ideally, it's kind of on-off binary. It's very clear. It's a fixed flow, so it doesn't have variation in it. It's consistent. Okay, issues with this one, in my experience, that create problems for people when you have a process that we would call it a workaround, where something, maybe a machine is down or a system isn't working right. In a service world, maybe you have an electronic system where you're filling forms out, and all of a sudden the system goes down, so you pull out your old hard copy form and start filling out information. What could go wrong? Obviously, if you've got experience in either of those, manufacturing or the service organization, you realize that there's plenty of things that can go wrong. Workaround things are not desirable. Lean focuses then on flow and says, let's be disciplined. Let's make sure that we establish flow and we maintain that, and we follow the rule of how we want something to flow through our process or value stream. So how does it flow? Well, steps in the process has to be connected. The connections need to be clear. They need to be binary. Connections, you'll hear the term Kanban. Again, that's a lean term. Basically what it means is a signal. So what we're saying here is we want to have a switch or a signal that says produce or not produce, stop, work on this. That's part of the system of lean that has flow and controls the flow by connecting the steps in that process. And each step in that process is going to have a defined work content. And we use the term standard work. There's a standard around that. There's a defined work content. Content of the work, sequence that the work is done in, the amount of time that's required for that work, the expected outcome of that work, as well as any inventory or product or service flow that is associated with it. That's all part of standard work. And the more specific it is, the easier it is to train someone to do it, because it's clear, it's got definition to it. But obviously it's more challenging to get that very specific work defined. What that standard work does for you, though, it provides that framework to reduce the unevenness between employees, to consistently perform work or perform a process step. And with the expected outcome defined, it allows you to make problems visible, to see when something isn't going as expected, and then to provide that signal that says, hey, I need help. And if I need help, I know who to ask for help. I know how to get to help. And I know steps that I go through to figure out what's causing my problem and to fix it. And that's this last step, this improvement and help chain. And I mentioned earlier about this idea of Kaizen, small change for the better. You know, in lean, it's not like all the problems go away, but what we want to do is recognize when we have a problem and to work together with the right people to solve those problems in a scientific way. I added this help chain idea here, this little diagram, just to reinforce, again, what lean is about. You might notice this diagram looks a little different than what you're typically used to in an organizational chart, where the group leader or the top dog, you might say, or the head person in an area usually would be shown at the top, and you'd have a pyramidal shape. This is shown opposite to that, where we've got the group leader at the bottom, supported by team leaders, and then the operators at the top. And it's drawn this way for a reason. The inference is the operators that are providing the service or the product are the ones that are adding value, and they're the ones that are engaged with the customer. And the rest of the organization's job is to make sure that we remove roadblocks and provide the right support for the operators to do their work. So,
okay, Tom, at this time, we're going to launch our next poll question.
Okay.
And that question is, what are the best ways to eliminate waste? Process mapping, organizing, mistake proofing, or all of these and more. So I'll give you guys some time to vote, and then I will show the results.
Okay.
Looks like the overwhelming response of 88% was all of these and more, with 12% saying process mapping and 4% saying organizing.
Interesting. Yeah, all these tools are definitely very valid. I've got the list here on the screen now. Tools to eliminate the waste. Now that we know what the wastes are, we start to identify them. I don't think there's one size fits all. The idea of value stream or process mapping, and I will qualify that, those are kind of different. Both of them document the steps in a process, which are important. Value stream mapping has a lot of other information on it. Now, value stream mapping addresses things like product flow or service flow, information flow, the timing of the work, where stuff might sit as in terms of inventory and things that typically you would not include in a process map. So they're both very useful. Anytime you're starting to do this kind of work, you need to think of it in terms of the context of the product or service that you're focused on, which gets us back to this idea of the product family or service family. Once we identify that, then we can start to, again, define the current condition and identify the wastes that are there. And with those things in mind, then we can start to think about what are these tools that we can deploy which are kind of best practice tools or standard work tools that help to drive those or eliminate those wastes. And a big one, a lot of times people like to do the 5S work. You'll see 6S now a lot of times with the 5 S's that are listed here, you know, sort, shine, set in order, standardize, and sustain. The 6th S is safety. And it's a good place to start because it's organizing the workplace. Everything has its place. You're putting it in the right place, so it's easy to find. You know where it's at. It's in a safe spot. And what that does is then allows you to visually recognize when something is amiss so that you can take action to return it to its appropriate best practice condition. Mistake proofing obviously is one. If you've got defects, some of those defects are created by somebody creating an error that creates a defect. So mistake proofing can attack that. Flow production, pull production, Kanban or signals, those things all help to make sure that people are working on the right things at the right time, and you're not creating excess inventory or service. And so you don't have issues with waiting and things like that. Standard work, as we mentioned, addresses unevenness. Balancing work addresses unevenness. Balancing work is creating work content or defining work content for different process steps that are more evenly distributed so that your capacity is more predictable and easier to manage. SMED, single minute exchange of dies. Setup reduction is another word for that. That's one that there's a specific set of steps for. And you know, we're not going to go into each of these in any further detail other than to recognize that they're definitely tools, they're countermeasure tools. They can be used in manufacturing as well as service organizations to eliminate or reduce waste. The last two there, total productive maintenance, that's a whole set of concepts on reliability of equipment or systems. Again, that can be applied to physical equipment in a plant, as well as electronic systems, data systems kind of things, computers, etc. The last concept that's listed here, level loading, that's probably more, in terms of my experience or reference to it, would be more of a product related issue, but the surge capacity would be the term you might use in a service organization where you've got demand variability from the customer and you need to try and compensate for that in some way. So all these are the tools. And I just listed a couple of slides here that, you know, we don't need to expand on too much. The intent here is to communicate that once we know the value stream we're working in, and we then know we can go and look at the current condition and identify the waste, that we can then apply these countermeasures to attack those wastes. So obviously defects can be attacked because you're making mistakes, so mistake proofing is a good one for that. If people are performing excessive work, then they're overprocessing, or maybe they have too much motion. We can reduce that with standard work and workplace organization, or 5S. If you see people waiting, it could be due to inventory, it could be due to systems reliability or total productive maintenance. Also, excess time in terms of setup obviously can be reduced. Waiting time can be reduced if you can improve your setup times. So these are all various references to the thinking of continuous improvement of lean is really around this: what is it that I want? What's my current condition? What are the root causes preventing me from achieving that? Once I understand those things, I can go to applying countermeasures and deploying those actions to solve those issues. That's this idea of A3 thinking. A3 actually came from the paper size. It's the European metric paper size. It's about an 11 by 17. And basically, it's trying to say, explain yourself, show me why you want to do these things and take these actions. How are you improving this value stream, eliminating waste, eliminating overburden, eliminating variation? And it utilizes a scientific method. We want to use it based on data, facts, referencing what is that the customer wants, because that's what matters, right? That's who's paying us. That's where they're defining the value to us. And looking at it within the context of our system or value stream and how it's connected. And then obviously back to making sure that we've addressed the root causes, not just the symptoms of the problems, so that we truly fix things and make the process better. Scientific method is really, some people use the term plan, do, check, act. That was the Deming reference. But there's also this idea that basically fundamentally, I form a hypothesis, I perform an experiment, I collect the data, I analyze the data to either confirm my hypothesis or reject the hypothesis. And I learn from that and take action. So it's based on facts. The A3 form or the process steps in an A3 form is akin to what the Six Sigma people would use for an improvement project. And you can see the steps here. They're listed in a linear fashion, but many times people end up having to circle back because as they discover new information, they have to reassess if they're doing the right thing. But it is fairly linear, and the steps are shown here. Obviously, all of it starts with a good statement of the problem or the waste that are observed, the current condition, and where do I want to go? What's the future state need to look like in order to drive the organization forward? So, in summary, what I tried to do is kind of set the stage with, what lean was about, what are the principles and goals of lean and the ideal state or true north condition, identifying what is of value based on customer and what is of waste and the 8 forms of waste that we typically see. And then attacking those wastes through deploying a lean manufacturing or service system with the 4 lean rules, deploying the appropriate tools to counter those wastes and apply them through a scientific method of A3 thinking. So hopefully that gave you a nice overview and was fairly clear. Yes, Patrick, I'll turn it back over to you now.
Yeah, we do have one question. We do have some questions, but in the interest of time, probably only have to be able to get to a couple. One person wants to know, where do I start?
Yeah, and I would say that kind of depends on your condition. As I said before, I would certainly say start small. I would not encourage some huge effort, because that's going to take resources and money that may not be available. If you make small improvements, those improvements will create some efficiencies that'll give you more time to do more work. So things like doing a 5S, I think organizing a workplace or an area in a facility might be good. Even just identifying the different types of products or services and separating those into groups and starting to think about how you process those and how you schedule those, how you provide those services would be useful.
Okay, great. So we are, in the interest of time, we are running out of time, so we want to be mindful of that. So we want to thank everybody for attending today. That does conclude our time together. If you would like to learn more about today's topic, we encourage you to contact us at 330-672-3416 or at yourtrainingpartner@kent.edu. We can bring all of our programs on site to your location and tailor them to fit your needs. Our fall 2020 open enrollment programs are all currently scheduled to run and are available for registration. We deliver these programs at the Educational Services Center of Northeast Ohio, which is located in Independence. We also offer an extensive list of online and on-demand programs. You can view and register for all of our programs at the website listed on your screen. Go ahead to the next slide, Tom. You can join the extensive list of clients and bring Kent State to your organization. Next slide. We also encourage you to register for our next webinar, which is on Friday, May 15th, when we will be discussing the professional customer service approach with Kent State facilitator Marvin Montgomery. During this webinar, we will discuss the 2 rules of customer engagement that will eliminate any negative assumptions and immediately show the customer that you care, the 5 benefits that are gained by using this approach to reinforce the value and not information dumping, and the importance of active listening to become a solutions provider. Registration for this webinar is now open, and you can register for it at our website. For those attending live, you will be asked to complete a short survey. Please complete this survey so that we can be assured that we are bringing you the most usable and relevant content possible. You will also receive a follow-up email early next week with a link to the recording of today's webinar. On behalf of Kent State Center for Corporate and Professional Development and our facilitator, Tom Putnam, thank you for joining us today. Have a great weekend and stay safe.
Thanks.